He was stirring his morning coffee when the last person he ever wanted to see stepped through his front gate. It was his ex, Madison, someone he thought he had erased from his life the day she disappeared with $8,000 of his savings. But this time, she didn't come to apologize. She came with a smile that didn't match her eyes, holding a phone like it was a weapon. She sat down across from him as if she still belonged there and whispered that she could destroy everything he had built, especially with his company's IPO only days away. She claimed she had photos, videos, and stories that could ruin him in a heartbeat. And unless he handed over the deed to his house, she would make sure the world saw every piece of it. In that moment, Ethan realized he wasn't dealing with an ex. He was dealing with a storm coming straight for his life. When Madison made her threat, Ethan expected her to leave after dropping her ultimatum, but she didn't. She leaned back in the chair like she owned the place and unlocked her phone with a smirk that made his stomach tighten. On the screen were thumbnails of old videos, nights out, arguments, private moments, things he barely remembered and definitely never imagined being used against him. She tapped one, letting the first few seconds play just loud enough for him to hear his own voice. Then she paused it and said she had dozens more. She claimed she could upload them all at once and make every investor panic days before the IPO. She said she knew exactly what kind of headlines would appear and how fast people would believe anything if it was messy enough. Ethan tried to keep his breathing steady as she scrolled through her gallery, showing him a curated sequence of threats disguised as memories. Madison talked as if she had rehearsed this moment for months. She even explained how she'd already written a long, detailed post accusing him of manipulation, financial abuse, and emotional harm. A story she could publish with a single tap. Then she asked again for the deed to his house, saying it was the least he owed her after everything she went through. Ethan stared at her, wondering how someone could twist the past into something so distorted and use it as ammunition without a hint of guilt. He took a slow breath and told her he needed a minute to think. He stood up, walked to the kitchen counter, and pretended to look for a pen. But instead, he quietly opened an app and hit the button to start a live stream. In seconds, his phone was broadcasting to a private group he had set up for moments exactly like this: trusted colleagues, friends, and his legal advisor. The camera pointed at the room, capturing Madison's voice, her threats, her demands, everything. Ethan returned to the table and sat down, carefully angling his phone so she wouldn't notice. Madison kept talking, completely unaware. She described the posts she planned to upload, the people she would contact, and how she would make sure her story went viral. She even bragged about how easy it was to manipulate public sympathy. Ethan didn't interrupt her. He let her talk, let her incriminate herself with every confident sentence. Eventually, Madison grew irritated by his silence and demanded an answer. He told her calmly that he wasn't giving her anything. She scoffed, said he'd regret it, and stormed out of the house while still shouting about what she would do next. Only after the door slammed behind her did Ethan end the live stream. He saved the video, backed it up twice, and forwarded it to his attorney. He didn't know exactly how far Madison would go, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a threat. This was the beginning of a war she thought she could win. Madison didn't wait long before launching her second wave of chaos. By 5 in the afternoon, Ethan's phone buzzed nonstop with notifications he didn't recognize. At first, he thought someone was tagging him in old photos. But when he opened his messages, his stomach dropped. His face was plastered across fake accounts, profiles created within the last hour, each one filled with twisted captions and cropped screenshots pulled from years-old moments. Madison had uploaded everything she threatened to release, but she didn't stop there. She crafted posts painting herself as a victim and Ethan as some cruel manipulator who had ruined her life. The comments section exploded faster than he thought possible. Strangers who had never met him were already forming opinions based on lies. He watched in disbelief as hashtags began climbing, fueled by drama-seeking users who loved a scandal more than the truth. But the content looked too coordinated to be spontaneous. That was his first clue that Madison had prepared all of this long before showing up at his door. Then his bank called. The representative on the line sounded uneasy. A woman claiming to be Ethan's wife had phoned in, providing suspiciously detailed personal information. She attempted to access his accounts, insisting she needed immediate verification for a financial emergency. The bank sensed something was off and reached out to him directly. Ethan asked if they had a recording. They did. When they played it back, he recognized the voice before she even finished the first sentence. Madison had pretended to be his spouse, using personal data she must have memorized during their relationship, hoping to crack open his financial records. Anger simmered beneath his calm exterior, but he stayed focused. He requested the call logs, timestamps, and a written incident report from the bank. Everything would become evidence. Meanwhile, notifications kept rolling in. Someone had filed a report to a local agency, claiming Ethan had stolen money from a former girlfriend. Ethan didn't even need to guess who submitted it. The wording matched Madison's style perfectly, dramatic, self-pitying, and full of contradictions. Still, he forwarded the information directly to his attorney, along with the live stream recording from earlier. Every move Madison made only tightened the noose around her own story. But she didn't realize it. She was too caught up in the rush of tearing him down to notice how sloppy her lies were becoming. As the evening went on, Ethan watched her posts get picked apart by people who recognized inconsistencies, timestamps that didn't match, screenshots that were obviously edited, claims that contradicted her own earlier posts. A few viewers even pointed out that Madison seemed to be posting from multiple accounts at once. Some users began calling her out, accusing her of faking evidence. That's when she snapped. In a frantic attempt to regain control of the narrative, she doubled down, posting even more fabricated claims and tagging random organizations she thought might pressure Ethan. But the more she posted, the clearer her desperation became. Ethan gathered every screenshot, every link, every bizarre accusation. He didn't need to say a word. Madison was exposing herself with every frantic update. And as the night deepened, Ethan realized something unmistakable. She wasn't just angry. She was unraveling, and the chaos was only getting started. By the following morning, the situation had escalated far beyond online posts and fake profiles. Ethan woke to a voicemail from an officer who asked him to return the call regarding a report filed against him. He knew exactly which report they meant. He dialed back, prepared for whatever Madison had thrown at him. The officer on the line sounded professional but skeptical, as if he already suspected something was off. He explained that a woman had reported Ethan for theft and emotional coercion, claiming he had taken thousands of dollars from her and refused to return it. Ethan calmly asked if the officer had reviewed the evidence she provided. There was a quiet pause. Then the officer admitted that most of Madison's evidence didn't align with basic timelines, and several documents she submitted appeared to be altered or incomplete. Ethan asked if he could email over his own materials. He sent the live stream recording, screenshots of Madison's posts, the bank's fraud report, and proof that she was the one who had stolen $8,000 years earlier. Within minutes, the officer called him back with a noticeably different tone. He confirmed that Madison's claims were being flagged as suspicious. He also informed Ethan that filing a false report was a criminal offense. She hadn't just stretched the truth. She had fabricated an entire narrative and tried to use law enforcement as a weapon. Meanwhile, online discussions were turning against her faster than she could react. Several users began comparing her claims side by side and discovered dozens of contradictions. People recognized stock photo backgrounds in screenshots she had posted. Others found that timestamps overlapped in ways that made her timeline impossible. Someone even traced one of her anonymous witnesses back to an account she had created the same afternoon. Madison tried to plug the holes, but every attempt only made things worse. Her explanations grew frantic, and the tone of her posts shifted from confident to unhinged. Ethan saved everything. Every edited timestamp. Every contradictory statement. Every meltdown. By midday, he received another call, this time from a detective who wanted to schedule a formal interview. Not with Ethan. With Madison. According to the detective, the department had found enough inconsistencies to consider her report intentionally false. And that meant potential charges for filing a fraudulent complaint, obstructing an investigation, and possibly harassment. Ethan felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. Madison had been trying to destroy him, yet she was the one digging herself deeper with every step. But she still didn't stop. Instead of backing down, she posted a long rant claiming the police were biased and protecting Ethan because of his upcoming IPO. People mocked her instantly. Some asked why the evidence she posted earlier kept changing. Others pointed out that her story had shifted 3 times within the same afternoon. The detective, monitoring the situation, noted all of this. Her own words were becoming exhibits in a growing case against her. By sunset, the department officially notified Ethan that Madison was now the subject of an investigation for filing a false report. She had crossed a line she couldn't walk back from. Her lies weren't just collapsing, they were turning into legal consequences she never anticipated. And for the first time since her reappearance, Ethan felt the tide beginning to turn. Ethan spent the next day doing something Madison never expected. He stayed quiet. He didn't defend himself publicly, didn't argue online, didn't post a single explanation. Instead, he focused on gathering facts, not opinions. If Madison wanted a war of noise, he intended to answer with a wall of truth she couldn't climb. He began digging through public court databases, many of which he had never needed before. It didn't take long to find what he suspected. Madison had a history she never wanted anyone to see. Old misdemeanor charges. A dismissed fraud case. A restraining order filed by someone he didn't know. And records from another state showing unresolved financial disputes that looked eerily similar to what she had done to him years ago. Everything he unearthed was public information, legally accessible with nothing more than a name and a county search. But the deeper he dug, the clearer the pattern became. Madison had repeated this cycle: relationships, accusations, dramatic collapses, and short-lived apologies multiple times before. Ethan felt a cold, understanding settle in his chest. He wasn't her first target. He was just the first one who documented everything. Once he compiled the documents, he organized them into folders with timestamps, annotations, and legal references. Then he made a simple website. Nothing flashy. Just a clean layout with sections labeled records, court documents, and public filings. He uploaded everything exactly as it was, unaltered public records anyone could verify on their own. Before publishing, he double-checked every file to ensure nothing was misrepresented. Then he hit publish. The site went live within minutes. At first, only a handful of people saw it, mostly those who had been following the drama. But they shared it quickly. Within an hour, threads began to appear breaking down the documents line by line. Users started connecting the dots between Madison's past behavior and her current accusations. Some people who once defended her suddenly deleted their comments. Others apologized for believing her too quickly. Ethan watched quietly as the narrative shifted, not because he argued louder, but because the truth spoke for itself. Meanwhile, Madison discovered the website almost immediately. Her reaction was explosive. She accused Ethan of doxing her, even though every file was a public court record available to anyone with internet access. She claimed he had fabricated documents that could be confirmed with a simple search. She threatened lawsuits, arrests, and consequences he would regret. But none of her threats held weight anymore. People saw through her panic. The more she protested, the more obvious it became that she wasn't outraged at injustice. She was terrified of exposure. Ethan saved every one of her frantic messages and forwarded them to his attorney. As night fell, traffic to the website increased. Friends texted him saying the site had started appearing on the first page of search results for Madison's name. Her reputation, the one she relied on for her finance career, was unraveling faster than she could contain the damage. And for the first time since her campaign of lies began, Ethan realized the momentum had shifted permanently. Truth wasn't just defending him now. It was dismantling everything Madison built on manipulation. By the time Madison realized the website had gone viral, she was already unraveling, but nothing compared to what happened 2 nights later. It was nearly 2 in the morning when Ethan woke to the sound of something hitting metal. At first, he thought it was an animal knocking over a trash bin. But then came a second crash, louder, sharper, almost deliberate. He got out of bed, glanced at the security app on his phone, and froze. On the live camera feed, Madison stood in his driveway, swaying slightly, gripping a baseball bat in both hands. Her hair was messy, her eyes glazed, and her movements jerky in a way that made it clear she wasn't sober. Before he could process the situation, she lifted the bat and swung it directly into the side of his car. The impact echoed through the speakers. He watched as she stepped back, shouted something incoherent, and swung again, this time denting the front fender. Ethan immediately called the police. While the call was connecting, Madison paced in circles, muttering to herself, then threw the bat down, picked it up again, and slammed it against his mailbox. At one point, she marched toward the front door and pounded on it with the flat of her hand, shouting Ethan's name. He stayed silent. The operator told him officers were already on their way. Through the feed, he could hear Madison rambling about being betrayed, about lies, and about how Ethan had ruined her future. Then her tone shifted into something darker. She said she wasn't leaving until he paid for what he did. Ethan locked himself in his home office and stayed on the line. The operator reassured him that units were only minutes away. Back on the camera, Madison staggered toward his car again, lifted the bat, and shouted a string of curses before smashing the windshield. Glass rained down the hood like ice. Moments later, headlights appeared at the edge of the street. Madison didn't notice until the officers were practically beside her. They stepped out, hands ready but calm, instructing her to drop the bat. Instead, she backed away, yelling that Ethan had set her up. When they moved closer, she swung the bat once, high, wide, not aimed at anyone, but enough to end the conversation. Within seconds, they disarmed her and placed her in handcuffs. She screamed the entire time, insisting she was the victim, insisting Ethan owed her compensation, insisting the officers didn't understand the real story. But none of that mattered. The entire episode had been recorded in high resolution from 3 different angles. Ethan submitted the footage before dawn. The charges began stacking immediately: vandalism, trespassing, making threats, and violating the temporary restraining order already filed by the detective on his case. When the arrest report reached him later that morning, he felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. It was the clearest proof, yet that Madison had fully crossed the line into criminal behavior. And there was no spinning this, no fake narrative she could build, no edited screenshot that could undo a video of her smashing his property with a weapon. For the first time in weeks, Ethan slept deeply, knowing the chaos swirling around him had finally been forced to stop. But the true reckoning, her final collapse, hadn't even begun yet. The courtroom was colder than Ethan expected. But the tension warming the air came entirely from Madison and her family. They sat in the front row, whispering angrily among themselves, throwing occasional glares at him as if he were the one on trial. This hearing wasn't even criminal yet, just the session to determine whether the temporary restraining order should become permanent. But the stakes for Madison were enormous, and she knew it. The judge entered, called the case, and asked both parties to step forward. Madison tried to walk with confidence, but the bruises on her ego were far more visible than the ones on her wrists from the night she was arrested. Her attorney attempted to begin with a statement about misunderstandings and emotional distress, but the judge cut him off quickly. The court wanted evidence, not poetry. Ethan's attorney started by presenting the livestream from the first confrontation. The moment Madison heard her own voice threatening Ethan, she stiffened. The judge watched the video without expression, though his raised eyebrow said more than words ever could. Next came the screenshots of her fake accounts, the bank report, and the false allegation she filed. The detective who had investigated the case testified that Madison's story had changed multiple times and that several documents she submitted were clearly altered. Madison shook her head violently, whispering, "That's not true," under her breath, but every contradiction was displayed on a screen for the entire courtroom to see. Then came the footage from the night of the attack. 3 camera angles played simultaneously, Madison stumbling into the driveway, swinging the bat, smashing the windshield, shouting Ethan's name like a warning. Her mother gasped. Her father covered his mouth. Madison closed her eyes, as if she could make the images disappear by refusing to look. But the judge didn't look away. He asked Madison, directly, why she had violated the temporary restraining order. Her explanation fell apart instantly. She claimed she only wanted to talk, though the video showed her destroying a car. She claimed she wasn't holding a weapon, though the bat gleamed in her hands. She claimed Ethan provoked her, though he had been asleep inside his house. The judge stopped her after only half a minute, saying her answers lacked credibility and awareness. Her attorney tried to intervene, but the damage was irreversible. Then, in a moment no one expected, Madison's father stood up and began shouting that Ethan had ruined their daughter's career. He accused the court of bias and demanded they punish the real criminal. A bailiff stepped forward, instructing him to sit down. He refused. Within seconds, both he and Madison's mother were escorted out for disrupting the proceedings. Madison looked mortified, her face flushed with humiliation. When the courtroom settled again, the judge delivered his ruling. He approved a full restraining order for 5 years. No contact, no proximity, no exceptions. He stated that Madison's actions showed a clear pattern of harassment, manipulation, and escalating danger. He fined her for the outburst, the false report, and the violation of the original order. And then he said something that echoed through the room. He noted that the case had already been flagged for local media due to Madison's arrest and the severity of the video evidence. Her downfall was now public record. By the time Ethan stepped outside, reporters were already discussing the story. He didn't speak to them. He didn't need to. Everything had been said inside that courtroom. For the first time in months, he walked away knowing the nightmare Madison tried to create had finally been dismantled by her own actions, her own rage, and her own lies. 3 months passed, and the aftermath of everything settled in ways no one could ignore. Madison lost her job within weeks of the hearing, the HR department citing conduct damaging to the company's reputation. She was placed on probation, fined, and ordered to repay the $8,000 she had stolen years before. Neighbors avoided her, friends stopped answering her messages, and her name began appearing on background checks flagged with pending investigations from another state. Every opportunity she once bragged about evaporated one by one. Meanwhile, Ethan's life moved in the opposite direction. His company's IPO launched successfully, drawing investors who admired how he handled the crisis with calm documentation rather than public drama. He started dating someone new, someone steady, kind, and far removed from the chaos Madison had brought into his life. His home remained his, restored and repaired, and the website outlining Madison's documented actions continued ranking at the top of search results whenever anyone looked her up. It stood as an unfiltered archive of consequences she had built for herself. Ethan didn't celebrate her downfall, but he accepted the truth of it. Actions have consequences, and Madison had finally reached hers.